Iyengar.
Hello, good morning everyone. Sorry, good afternoon everyone. So we learned about how to create beautiful code. Now let's learn about how to create a beautiful documentation. Now am I audible? Is it alright? Okay. So creating an impact with good documentation. Product documentation is probably the best and the easiest way you can make your user feel in control of the product. And often in the absence of relevant and understandable documentation, it is less likely that the user will feel confident about your product. However, having said that, the challenge is not always lack of relevant information. The challenge sometimes is to get the users to the solutions that they're looking for quickly and with minimal effort. So today I'm going to talk about how you can overcome this challenge and some best practices I would like to share with you. So first things first, know your audience. Before even you start documenting your product, you have to ask yourself two questions. Who is using my document and why are they reading my document? It's very important because you have to adapt your documentation, you have to adapt your writing to meet the needs of, interests of and skill sets of the reader. So it's very important to know who your user is. Now there are three possibilities. Depending on what you're writing, you may have a single type of user. For example, you've written probably a script for the developers to use, and you want to document about the script on how you can use, what the script does and how you can use it. So you know that the audience here is a developer, you know the developer skill set. So you can decide on how much you can elaborate, how much you want to elaborate in your document. Now the second possibility is your product may have multiple types of users based on roles. Say for example, you may have an admin user, you may have a business analyst using your product, you may have a techie, a developer using your products. So in this case, there are multiple users with different skill sets. Now the most common mistake that we do is assume that one size fits all philosophy works. It doesn't, trust me, it doesn't, especially when your goal is to get the user to the solutions they're looking for quickly. So in this case, you have to cater to each type of users separately. How you will do it, we'll come to that later. Let's talk about the third category, which is when you're not sure of who your reader is. Say for example, you've written a gaming application and the user could be a 10-year-old, an old person, or probably even a techie. So you're not sure about the skill sets of the end user. In this case, yes, you have to assume that one size fits all. You have to have the certain assumptions in place and make sure that you are documenting those assumptions about the user skill set before you start with your documentation. Now after you have decided on who your document is and how much you want to elaborate in your document, the second thing, very important, is how you're going to make the document flow. Oftentimes people just jump into documentation and let it and see how it flows. That's not a good approach. You have to have a plan in mind. Now here also you have two possibilities. Depending on how your user is using your product, you have to document it like that. So for example, the first possibility is a user may use your product based on features. Say if your product has three different features, A, B, C, and if a user is using a single feature as a whole, then it makes sense to categorize your document based on features. Section 1 feature A, section 2 feature B. However, the second possibility is a user might be using your product based on the roles. Say if I'm an admin, I'd like to have a section entirely for administration tasks. So if it is more likely that your user is using your product based on the role, then you have to categorize your documentation based on the user roles. So you must have heard of admin guides, developer guides, user guides. So the categorization is based on the roles of the user. So the point 2 is you have to make sure which is the most effective way of categorizing your document. Once you have that, so you have two things sorted now: how much you want to elaborate in your documentation, and how you want to make your documentation flow. How is it going to be categorized? Now the third part is getting to the information. This is my favorite part. Any information that you would like to document falls under one of these three categories. The first one is conceptual information, the theory. For example, product description, feature descriptions, overviews, introduction, a theoretical part. So the first type of information is the theory part, conceptual information. The second type is procedural information, say list of tasks that you can write in steps. For example, how to install your product, how to configure product, how to add user roles. So the second type is a procedural information, and the third type is a reference information. Anything that you would like to list down, say a list of jars or field descriptions, anything that you can put it in bulleted lists or a tabular format. Now there is no information that does not fall in one of these three categories. What I'm trying to say is there can be no fourth category. Now the trick here is make sure you separate these three information types in different topics. Never club your conceptual information with the procedures. Never club your reference information with the conceptual information. See, it may sound useful for you as a writer because you have your theory introduction in place, and you have all the procedures related to that, and then you have all the reference information. Imagine an advanced user who's just looking for a specific information, and he has to go through the entire huge topic to look for what he's looking for. If you break down your information in conceptual or procedure or reference based on these and have indicative titles, then it becomes easier for the user who's looking for a specific solution to get to the point. And then, a classic example for this would be if you say, for example, you want to write about a CLI command. So in the conceptual information, you'd write about what the command is, what it does, and in the procedural information, you write about how to use it. Say, for example, open the terminal and then navigate to the home folder and run the command, blah blah. And in the reference information, which is with the third topic, would be probably the attributes of the commands. What are the attributes available and description of each. So you have three different topics, and you can make them flow one after the other in your document. So it's more effective for the user to use. Now finally, use keywords. Oftentimes, users are not reading your document from start to end. They're looking for keywords, searching for keywords. So it's very important to know what these keywords are and use them in your documentation. One of the tips is, in addition to keywords, use key phrases, because sometimes users are searching for a full phrase in order to narrow down their search. So make sure you're using these phrases as well, so that you can get the reader to the solution that they're looking for faster. And another tip would be to use synonyms. So you're not sure about what the user is looking for. Say some users might be looking for task lists, and some will be looking for list of tasks. So do it smartly, because you don't want to sound like you're talking about two different things, but using synonyms for keywords often helps for an effective documentation. So for example, Pune University or University of Pune, So that's about some good practices on how to get your user use your documentation quickly. Now some more on what are the different types of documentation that is available. Say you have a product and you're not sure whether you have to write a manual or you have to write an article, or there are several types of documentation available. So which one should you go for? To throw some light on that, I'd like to invite my co-presenter David, and over to you, David.
Thanks, Vidya. So after getting to know about the usage of keywords and the information segregation in different type of topics and things like that, now since we have the content, what's next is how do we package it? So the packaging is also important, and it depends on the effort involved, as in the cost of effort, and the cost of maintenance as well. So based on these two parameters, there could be some more. You could decide on the documentation type, which could be a user guide, a printed format, or it could be in HTML file, or it could be a TXT, and things like that. And the deliverable formats again, so sort of they are mapped to each other. And there are benefits or advantages of the different deliverable formats. For example, if you have a web-based content, it's easy for you to update it, and the updated content would be easily available to the users. And if it's a printed one, probably it would not be so easy to do it, right? And of late, couple of formats that are, sort of being used very often are videos is one, and then blogs another, So that's also an effective way to share the information about your application or your script that you've written. And this again depends on the sort of audience type as well. Assuming that, I don't have the time to look for information in a linear way. Linear way here is, going through a guide, a printed guide, or even a PDF file. Maybe sometimes it's a bit hard. So HTML files, smaller topics, make it easy for you to search the information as well. So that's about the documentation type and deliverable formats. And with that, I have completed our session. And thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, we would be happy.
Hi, David. Quick question. Any recommendations on the fonts, font sizes, images, as far as the documentation is concerned? Yep, the guidelines are pretty much good. We tend to follow those, but we end up hitting on a wall when we are trying to decide on a particular font, or the images or the size of images, because some people will stretch it and not keep the aspect ratios. So where does that land us then?
Very good question. And your question primarily asks a lot of, sub-points about the documentation. So to start with the font and the font size, the ideal is a font which is readable on the monitor, that is on the display, okay, easy to read. And also if you print it, it still is the same, all right? An example would be, if I have to say a font, it would be Arial is one, okay? And that's not the standard. You're free to change the fonts, but it needs to be readable is one. Second, the font size, the ideal font size used in documentation is font size 10. Arial font size 10 is good enough, right? And for the headings, it needs to be slightly more. So one of the things that was, told to me when I started tech writing ages ago was, don't use too many fonts and too many font sizes in a document. So font, again, don't have too many fonts, use just one font. Font size for the headings, it should just be like 12 to 14, bold. And so these are the fine aspects of the font and font size. And talking about images, There are a lot of points about images, all right? So I'll probably not, I'll try to share some of them. One is if you have to resize an image, okay, resize it, maintaining the aspect ratio so that it doesn't get, what is the word? There's a word for that. It doesn't get stretched is primarily, okay? And if you have the habit of resizing an image, by pulling the corners, it should always be by pulling the corners, not from the center part, okay? And some of the tools help you to resize, maintaining the aspect ratio when you pull the corners, and some don't. So if it doesn't, there should be an option to do that, okay? So this is one thing I used to do is press the shift key and pull the corner so it maintains the aspect ratio.
So to add to that, if you're going for a doc suite, you have multiple documents, make sure you have a template in place. And the font size also depends on whether the user is more likely to read it on a phone or, how is he probably using it. So if you have a template in place and mostly they have guidelines on the font size and pictures and stuff. So if it is a doc suite, make sure you're following guidelines so the entire doc suite is looking consistent. And secondly, pictures, they also make the documentation heavy. So make sure you use them wisely. You don't have to put a screenshot after every step, write in a way that it is indicative, so you need not put too many pictures in there. Of course, flow charts, architectural diagram, they are good to have. So you have to have the right balance when it comes to pictures because they tend to make the documents difficult to maintain.
Hi. I'm not sure how relevant this will be to ask you, but as a developer or as API developers, when we develop an API, where do you actually look at for documentation? I mean, we write such a thing either to what is this API doing and what is the input, what is the output, and what all things do that do documentation team required from all the API for mostly APIs.
So,
kind of thing.
can I answer? So API documentation is, like I said, I think you should know the audience of an API documentation. It's definitely developer. So most of the times I've seen products having a separate API guide, API documentation, or if they do not have it, it goes in the development guide. So does that answer your question?
Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon, sir. Usually, I start writing documentations, and many of the time, what happens is that the image goes somewhere else, the text goes somewhere else. So there is not a proper standard I could write. Means I export it to PDF, so it will change something. If I export to HTML, it will change something. So do you recommend any tool we can use so that it will be consistent everywhere?
There are several documentation tools available. If you're looking for open source tools, it totally depends on how you're writing and how much you're writing. If your documentation is huge, like 200, 400 pages, probably a Word doc will not help you because it breaks after a number of pages. There are some proprietary tools as well. So depending on what you're looking for, there are n number of tools available. If you want to write in plain text, like I said, FrameMaker, these are all proprietary tools. If you want to write in XML, you have Oxygen XML. There are a lot of things. If you want to write in ASCII doc, there are some free open source tools available. I think the list is huge. I'm not sure what all I can list right now. I've worked on several open source and proprietary tools. So you can look for, depending on what language you write, if you want a plain text, there's several available. So probably we can take it offline. I mean, I can give you a reference of hundreds of tools that are free to use for you.
And just to add to that, it's always a good practice to create a template and use a template. The issues of images moving here and there and the text appearing differently in different formats is primarily because it's not tied to a style in a template.
Any more questions? Okay.
Are the target audience expectations very different now? I mean, are people reading documentation mainly on, say, handheld devices rather than a big monitor? Not reading printouts at all, but going for smaller devices? Um, I mean, I want to know what is the target audience these days really in terms of where they will be looking at things.
So it totally depends on the product you're writing for, sir. If you're writing enterprise product documentation, then the users are looking for huge guides, because the information is so huge. You have to cater to different types of users for an enterprise, big product. So obviously we don't expect a user to read those on their phone. So it totally depends on the size of your product and size of your documentation. So you have to know, say if it's something on the web, if you're writing a blog post or an article, the audience is definitely bigger. So, but if you're writing a role base, say for example, if you're writing specifically for a Java developer, so you know your audience then. So it totally depends. The size of the product and the number of users and their skill sets totally depends on the audience. You have to analyze who all are using your product. Does that answer your question? Okay, can you elaborate?
Yeah, if you have some small product which is targeting maybe a maximum for 1,000 people, but it's some kind of a manual guidelines on how they should be using my product.
Okay.
What I want to know is I really don't know how they will be using the devices. So
Okay.
you had asked me I should find that out, but I was trying to find out from you.
Okay, so you're saying that you're not sure about the skill sets of your audience. Is that true? Okay, so in that case, you have to make certain assumptions. Say, like I said, for example, if you've written a gaming application and the game can be used by anybody, so you're not sure how much you should write because you're not sure of the skill set. So in that case, go for assumptions, assume or prerequisites that, okay, in order to use my document, these are the prerequisites. State them and then decide on how much you want to elaborate on a document.
Any other questions?
Okay, so we'll end the session here. Thank you very much for your talk.